By the third night in Black Ridge, the forest stopped watching me and started talking. My name is Jack, and at 27 I came to a final, irreversible conclusion. Humanity is the noisiest, most frantic, and most pointless species on the planet. My job in the insurance industry in Boston turned my life into an endless stream of numbers, other people's complaints, and the constant hum of air conditioners. I was searching for solitude. Real, primal solitude, the kind that makes your ears ring and finally forces your thoughts into a neat, orderly line. I found the hunting cabin deep in the Black Ridge National Forest on an abandoned survivalist forum. The seller, whose voice on the phone sounded like dry skin rubbing against cold marble, let it go for next to nothing. Just grab the keys from the mailbox, kid. And good luck. You'll need that more than money, he said, and hung up. At the time, I chalked it up to the oddities of forest folk. I drove there in my old Ford, its suspension groaning at every bump in the broken logging road. The trunk was packed to the brim, a Remington 700 rifle with a heavy forged barrel, boxes of military MREs that tasted like cardboard, a warm sleeping bag, and my greatest obsession, 8 high-tech trail cameras equipped with motion sensors, thermal imaging, and night vision. I'm not just a hunter. I'm a wildlife photographer. My true passion is spying on the forest when it thinks no one is watching. The cabin appeared before me in the rays of the setting sun, a massive structure made of cedar logs blackened by decades of time. Wedged between towering pines and a sheer, brooding mountain slope. The air was so dense and humid it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. It smelled of pine needles, icy water from a nearby stream, and a strange, barely perceptible aroma of old musk and stagnant dust. Inside, everything was coated in a thin layer of ash and time. The old cast iron stove in the corner looked like the gaping maw of a sleeping beast. I devoted the first day to the ritual of setting up the cameras. I circled the area within a 1-mile radius, feeling the soft carpet of needles spring beneath my boots. I chose trails that felt alive, where the ground was pressed down by heavy bodies and tree bark bore signs of activity, but something about those marks made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. On the trunks of old pines, about 10 feet off the ground, there were deep vertical grooves. These weren't bare claw marks, which usually run horizontally or diagonally. It looked as if someone had used enormous chisels to split the wood open, digging straight toward the core. The smell around those trees was vile, sharp and acidic, like vinegar mixed with rotting meat. I told myself it was some rare type of fungus. Back at the cabin, I sat on the creaking porch with a cup of coffee. The silence in Black Ridge was wrong. Birds stopped singing at exactly 5 in the evening, as if someone unseen had pressed a mute button. The forest didn't just grow quiet, it froze, waiting. Even the wind stopped stirring the treetops. I felt hundreds of invisible eyes watching me from the deep shadows of the undergrowth. It was the sensation of prey being observed by a predator that hadn't yet decided when to strike. I went inside, slid the heavy oak deadbolt shut, it answered with a dull, final sound, and sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the stove cool. The morning of the second day did not bring the peace I had hoped for. I woke up freezing, despite being wrapped in 2 blankets. Outside, a fog hung so thick that the pines 10 steps from the cabin looked like blurred gray ghosts. It seeped through the cracks in the windows, carrying the scent of ozone, the kind that comes before a powerful storm, and a faint smell of wet dog fur. After breakfast, I went to collect data from the first 3 cameras. The forest was unnaturally damp. Water droplets fell from branches onto my hood with a sick, squelching sound. When I pulled the memory card from the first camera and inserted it into my tablet right there beneath the trees, my breathing stopped. The first 40 frames were normal: night forest, swaying bushes, an owl in flight. But at 3:14 a.m., the camera detected movement. From the darkness, right at the edge of the flash's range, a limb emerged. It was long, jointed, hairless, but covered in short, rigid spines like porcupine quills. At the end were 3 long, curved fingers gripping a birch trunk with such force that the bark cracked. In the next sequence of frames, I saw part of its torso. The creature's skin looked like wet, lumpy asphalt. Veins pulsed beneath it, filled with some ink-black substance. But the final frame made me drop the tablet into the mud. The creature was standing directly in front of the lens. The shot captured a single massive eye, devoid of eyelids or lashes. Its horizontal pupil, like a goat's, was dilated, and a dull, toxic yellow light burned from within. There was no skin around the eye, only exposed circular muscles that looked freshly flayed. It wasn't just passing by, it was looking into the camera. It knew I would see this. I nearly ran back to the cabin, panic gripping my throat with icy fingers. Trying to calm myself, I decided to inspect the property itself. Under the porch, deep in the shadows, I found what I'd missed the day before: a neat pyramid of bones. A deer's jaw, shoulder blades, small ribs. They weren't gnawed. They were emptied. Each bone had a tiny, perfectly round hole drilled into it, as if done with a jeweler's bit. Inside, the bones were completely dry, stripped of marrow. Among the remains, I found a rusty leather collar with a tag that read, Rex. Inside the cabin, I rummaged through the drawers of an old dresser, desperate for answers. At the very bottom, beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers, I found a newspaper clipping from the local county paper dated 1998. The headline read, "The Black Ridge Mystery, Disappearances Continue." The article referenced an ancient native legend that called the creature the devourer of meaning. It did not eat flesh, it drained life through fear and spinal fluid. By evening, the smell around the cabin had changed. Pine was gone. The air was now saturated with the nauseating stench of rotten fish and sulfur. I barricaded the door with an extra beam. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard something heavy slowly moving across the roof. It didn't walk, it flowed. The scrape of claws against the shingles sounded like a knife on glass. It was searching for a way in. It sighed, long, whistling breaths, directly above my head. Dawn on the third day was gray and lifeless. The sun couldn't pierce the leaden clouds. I decided I'd had enough. To hell with the money, to hell with the photos. I had to escape this cursed forest. I grabbed my bag and rifle and ran to the car. What I saw dropped me to my knees in the cold mud. My Ford was ruined. All 4 tires weren't just flat, they'd been shredded into long strips, as if fed through a giant shredder. Worse was the hood. It was crushed like a tin can. The radiator had been ripped out and lay several yards away, and a bright green, fluorescent puddle of antifreeze slowly soaked into the ground. The car, my only connection to civilization, was dead. I ran back inside. Sweat slicked down my spine. Panic isn't just a feeling, it's a physical weight crushing your chest, stealing your breath. I pressed my back against the door, gripping the rifle until my knuckles went white. Then the radio crackled. At first, it was static, crackling like breaking bones. And then, I heard my own voice. "Beautiful place," the radio said. The intonation was mine, but the voice was flat, mechanical, like an old gramophone. Silence. Silence. Jack. My legs gave out. It was a mimic. It collected sounds, phrases, intonations like a magpie hoards shiny trinkets. It was studying me. Tasting my name. I spent the entire day boarding up windows with planks torn from the floor and an old cabinet. My palms bled, splinters buried themselves in my skin, but I felt nothing. My world shrank to the size of that room. I stacked empty tin cans in the corner to hear if it tried coming through the floor. Now I understood more. It wasn't an animal, it reacted to heat and infrared. My cameras glowed to it like neon signs. It had an amorphous body. Judging by the roof marks, it could alter its density, solid when striking, soft like a slug to seep through cracks, but most importantly, it fed on fear. The more I panicked, the louder it scraped. It waited for my mind to break completely, so the harvest would be rich. By evening, rain began to fall, a cold, relentless downpour. It drummed against the roof, masking any movement. Then the knocking changed. It wasn't scraping, it was soft. Human.
"Jack, sweetheart, open the door,"
came my mother's voice, the voice I hadn't heard since her funeral 10 years ago.
"I'm cold, Jack. It's so dark in the forest."
I screamed and fired the rifle straight into the door. The blast was deafening. In response came a high, vibrating shriek that shattered the glass in the old cabinet and made my ears ring. The creature retreated into the forest, but I knew, it hadn't left, it had only changed tactics. The last day began with a dead, vacuum-like silence. The rain had stopped, leaving behind only dripping water and the smell of damp, rotting earth. I had only 5 rounds left. 5 pieces of lead against an ancient horror. I understood that if I stayed in the house for one more night, I would simply lose my mind. My only chance was the old fire lookout tower called Eagle Eye, 3 miles to the north. According to the maps, it was supposed to have a long-range radio with an independent power supply. I clenched what little will I had left into a fist, checked the knife on my belt, and stepped outside. The forest looked different. The trees seemed unnaturally elongated, and the shadows were far too thick and long for that time of day. The dust on the trail was coated with a layer of thick, iridescent slime. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was following me openly, snapping branches and letting out quiet, mocking chuckles in my own intonations. Halfway to the tower, I saw it up close for the first time. It was sitting on an oak branch directly above the trail. A massive, 12-foot thing, its limbs folded like a praying mantis's. It slowly turned its head. There truly was no face, only a vertical black slit pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, and that single yellow, hypnotic eye that seemed to see straight through me, down to the bone, down to my deepest fears. It jumped, I fired, aiming at the center of that swaying nightmare. The bullet tore a chunk of black sludge from its side. The creature howled and, performing an impossible midair somersault, vanished into the dense ferns. I ran like I never had in my life. My lungs burned as if filled with molten lead, my heart hammered somewhere in my throat, and sweat flooded my eyes, blurring the world. I reached the tower just as the sun began to set. The rusty metal ladder groaned beneath my feet. I felt the tower tremble, it was already climbing after me. The scrape of claws against metal threw sparks into the encroaching dusk. I burst into the cabin, slammed the hatch shut, and shoved the heavy metal document safe on top of it. The radio, I lunged for it, but the screen was shattered, the wires cut with neat, precise slices. The creature had been here before. It knew my plan. It had calculated everything. I curled into a corner, gripping the knife. I left the last round in the chamber for myself. I didn't want to know how it drank life. The blows against the hatch were so powerful that the metal floor began to bend into an arc. Jack. Jack. My own voice whispered from beyond the hatch. It's time to eat. Don't be afraid. And then my gaze fell on the emergency kit in the corner. There, among expired bandages, lay an old signal pistol. And one flare. Bright red. Magnesium. I remembered how it had twitched at the infrared flashes of the cameras. Its eye was tuned to detect even the slightest heat fluctuations. It was hypersensitive. When the safe was thrown aside and the hatch burst open with a crash, a bony, needle-covered limb pushed into the cabin. I waited until that massive yellow eye appeared in the opening, dilated with anticipation. "Look at me, you bastard!" I rasped, and pulled the trigger of the flare gun. A blinding flash of magnesium flame flooded the cramped cabin. The temperature spiked instantly to its maximum. The creature emitted a sound that couldn't be called a scream. It was the howl of tearing matter, the shriek of a falling star. Fire immediately engulfed its dry, crystalline skin. The Reaper tore loose from the tower, becoming a living torch, and crashed into the darkness of the forest, igniting the dry grass beneath it. The flare gun in my hands felt like a toy against this ancient god of shadows. But when the magnesium flare hissed into its yellow eye, the world ceased to exist. The tower cabin became the epicenter of a supernova. Blinding, unbearable white light burned my retinas, and through it I heard the sound that gave me hope, the crack of the creature's dry flesh bursting apart. It didn't just scream. It vibrated, collapsing from within. Magnesium burned at a temperature this crystalline life form couldn't endure. The Reaper slipped from the hatch, its claws shrieking across the metal floor as it plunged into the forest's black void, trailing toxic smoke. I didn't wait. Fire leapt instantly to dry papers and old furniture. The wooden beams, dried by decades, ignited like matches. "Run! Run!" My own voice whispered, but this time it wasn't the mimic. It was instinct. I tumbled onto the ladder as the floor buckled from heat. Metal burned my hands even through leather gloves. I slid down, tearing skin from elbows and knees, pain flaring in my burned eyes. 10 feet from the ground, the tower shook. A gas canister exploded above. A fireball lit the forest for hundreds of yards. In that hellish light, I saw it. It wasn't dead, burned, missing a limb. The creature writhed below, trying to extinguish flames on its spined hide. Its single remaining eye spun wildly, searching for me. I crashed into bushes and ran. Ignoring the crunch in my ankle, behind me came heavy, uneven footsteps. It chased me, even dying, even burning alive. It wanted my essence. I burst onto the road I'd arrived on 4 days earlier. My ruined Ford stood there like a monument to defeat. Then headlights appeared. A forest patrol car rounded the bend. I ran into the road, waving, choking on smoke and screams. Tires screeched. A ranger leapt out, rifle raised. I turned, the road was empty. Only ash swirled in the headlights, and the forest crackled with the dying fire tower. The creature vanished, dissolving into shadow the moment it touched civilization's light. 6 months have passed. I sit on the porch of a small house on the California coast. There are no forests here. Only endless sand, salt water, and gulls that never mimic human voices. My ankle healed, but I still limp when the weather changes. The official explanation was dull and predictable: a forest fire caused by negligent handling of fire and an attack by a rabid grizzly bear. My testimony was dismissed as hypoxia and shock. A Boston psychologist spent 3 months telling me my brain had filled memory gaps with myths to protect itself. But I know the truth. Every time I look in the mirror, I see burn scars around my eyes. They look like a mask. Worse is the itching at the back of my skull. The same itch you feel when something is watching you. I survived. I escaped. But I don't feel like a victor. I feel like prey that was given a head start. Last night, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, taken by my own trail camera, the one I thought had burned. It showed me sleeping in the cabin on the very first night. Above my bed, hanging from the ceiling, was a long, spined limb, its tip an inch from my skull. On the back, in my own handwriting I barely recognized, were the words, "You run well, Jack. It makes the taste of fear exquisite." I closed the steel shutters. I turned on every light. I picked up my Remington, always loaded now, beside my bed. I survived Black Ridge. But the forest never lets go. It only waits until I crave silence again. Sometimes I think I'm still running down that road, and the patrol headlights were just another trick of the Reaper, that I never truly left the tower. I look at the ocean, but see only swaying black pine tops, and somewhere deep in my memory, the yellow eye blinks slowly, inviting me to a new hunt.